Hello everyone, today we are going to be doing our fish dissection. We are going to use this video as our primary means of learning the different characteristics that make fish, fish. Alright, the fish we're going to be dissecting today is a perch. Perch are commonly found in the northern United States. Alright, we're going to start off looking at the external anatomy of the fish. One of the most striking things about fish that makes fish fish is the presence of scales on their body. Scales act as a protective coating to protect the fish along with a layer of slime. We're going to go ahead and take one of these scales and put it under a microscope. There are 4 different types of scales that fish can have. Most fish have either ctenoid or cycloid scales. Some primitive fish, like garfish, have heavy plates of armor scales called ganoid scales. And sharks and their friends have trident-shaped placoid scales. The perch has ctenoid scales. All right, we're now looking at the perch's scale. We're looking at what I'm going to call the top of the scale, but on reality, in the part of the fish, it would be facing back towards the tail, sort of interlocking with the neck scale. If we follow the curvature of the scale down towards what I'm calling the bottom of the scale, the part that would be rooted inside of the fish's body, facing towards its head, we can see a whole bunch of rings, layers of rings. If you're really good at scale identification, you could count the number of rings on the scale and determine how old the fish is. When you think of a fish, oftentimes the first thing you think of are fins. Fish have 5 different types of fins, each for some different purpose. In general, fins are used to swim. On the back of the fin is the dorsal fin. This fish has a pair of 2 dorsal fins. The dorsal fin is used to keep the fish moving straight through the water as it swims. If it didn't have its dorsal fin, it would just sort of spiral around like a football as it swam. Next, in the back, the tail fin is also called the caudal fin. The caudal fin is the motor of the fish to make it move forward. On the sides of the fish are 2 paired pectoral fins. You also have pectoral muscles. If you've ever worked out your pecs, those are your big chest muscles. So these are sort of like, almost like the arms of the fish. They're used to steer them right and left. On the bottom of the fish are 2 different types of fins. There's a set of fins called the pelvic fins. They have several functions. They help the fish to sort of post up on the bottom of the ocean or lake or wherever he's living. But they also help the fish to slow down. If he's swimming along, he wants to put on the brakes, he goes, puts out those pelvic fins and slows down. Finally, in the back is the anal fin. It's called the anal fin because it's right next to the fish butt. On the fish, the butt is called the vent. The anal fin is sort of like if you've ever seen a surfboard and they have the little things going straight down into the water on the back of the surfboard that help it to move straight. That's what the anal fin is used for. Next up, we are going to look at the eye of the fish. Fish eyes should be similar to squid eyes because they live underwater. Remember the shape of the squid's eye's lens. We're going to pop this lens out and see what shape it is on the fish. Here's the lens. Same shape as the squid's. Recall that the squid's lens was spherical because light acts differently underwater than it does on land. Your lens was shaped like a contact lens or like a shallow bowl because the light acts differently on land to give you a clear picture up in the air. And next up, we're going to take a look at the fish's gills. All fish have gills in order to breathe. Now the gills are found under a hard bony plate covering called the operculum. This serves to protect the gills, which are essential for respiration, but also very soft and delicate. So if we bend our operculum back, we see our gill arches exposed. There's a whole bunch of them stacked on top of each other like pages in a book. We're going to go ahead and cut out one of those pages. Take a closer look at it. Here is a gill. In the middle of the gill, The supporting structure is called the gill arch. Coming off of the arch are lots of little feathery structures called the filaments. In life, these would be red because they'd be full of blood. They are the structures that are actually pulling the oxygen out of the water and then getting rid of the carbon dioxide. They're facilitating the gas exchange. That's why there's so many of them, to increase the surface area. And if you look on the inside of the gill arch, you see lots of little structures that look like bones or like little teeth. These are called the gill rakers. The purpose of the gill rakers is to keep food inside of the fish's mouth. When the fish wants to breathe, right, he opens his mouth, sucks water in, and then squirts it out through this hole behind the operculum. Sometimes his food might go with that water, and so the rakers act like prison bars to help keep the food inside of his mouth. Also on the outside of the fish is a unique structure called the lateral line. You can see the lateral line right here. It's sort of like a little line of holes that runs down the side of the fish. These holes are filled with little, almost hair-like structures that are very, very sensitive. Whenever water hits the lateral line, the fish can feel the water moving. So it's sort of like an extra sensory organ that helps the fish to feel everything in the water around him. If you've ever seen a whole school of fish moving together in one giant ball, sort of like in Finding Nemo, how they all move together to make arrows and shapes, fish can do that because of their lateral line, because they know where all the other fish are in the water around them based on that sensory organ.
Any of you heard of P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney?
Sydney? Oh, sure. Why, Ted here's got relatives in Sydney, don't you, Ted?
Sure do.
Oh, hey, they know Sydney. You wouldn't know how to get there, would you?
What you want to do is follow the EAC. That's East Australian Current. Big current. Can't miss it. It's in that direction.
It is now time to go inside of our fish and look at the fish's internal anatomy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my scissors just inside of the vent. I'm going to angle them up so that I don't chop up any of the internal organs. I'm going to go ahead and slice the fish from back all the way up to the front. Right, so here's the internal anatomy of the fish. As I was opening the fish up, I sprayed fish juice all over my computer, so I just had to finish cleaning that up. Right up front, right between the gills, you see the fish's heart. The fish has a closed circulatory system and a two-chambered heart. There's two different chambers to it to pump blood throughout the entire body. You have a four-chambered heart, 4 different sections to your heart. Also striking in this fish are 2 large orangey structures. I'm going to go ahead and pull those out. These are the fish's eggs. This was a mama fish. And if we break some of these open, you can see all of the individual grainy little eggs. Most fish have external fertilization. Remember, that means that the eggs and the sperm would both just be expelled out into the water with the hopes that they would meet. Most of the rest of the organs that you see in here have to do with the fish's digestive system. I'm going to go ahead and pull all of them out. We see the fish's liver, which is used to filter blood, but also to produce some digestive juices. You see the fish's stomach right here, which if we squeeze it out, there are some bones of tinier fish ground up inside of it. Pretty nasty. And then just back of the stomach are long, stringy intestines. The intestines are used to help absorb the nutrients that the fish extracts from its food. The last structure I want to show you on our fish is the fish's swim bladder. The swim bladder is a unique organ. It's sort of like a balloon inside the fish. When the fish wants to go up in the water, it fills its swim bladder up with gas and it moves up. When it wants to move down, it squeezes gas out of its swim bladder and it moves down. On this fish, the swim bladder is on the very dorsal side of the body cavity. You see it's sort of like a balloon. It has some air inside of it still. The perch we just dissected was a bony fish. Let's go ahead and compare its anatomy to the anatomy of our cartilaginous fish. This is a dogfish shark. Now, there are several species of dogfish sharks throughout the world. Some of them do live in the Florida waters around Tampa Bay. First thing we'll notice is that the dogfish shark has roughly the same external anatomy as the perch. Many of the same fins, but their scales are very different. If I rub the dogfish shark's scales, I want you to listen. You should be able to hear how rough they are, almost like sandpaper. Shark skin was used as a primitive form of sandpaper. Their scales are sort of trident-shaped, facing backwards, and are used to help them be more hydrodynamic, swimming through the water at a quicker speed. If we look at a piece of shark skin under the microscope, we can see the individual placoid scales. They're sort of sharp, facing back towards the tail, allowing the shark to swim faster through the water and be more hydrodynamic. Then we can also see lots of pigment cells. That's all of these darker cells. They give the shark its color. All right, if we look at the anterior portion of the shark, we see small holes on its face called nares. The bony fish, the perch, also had nares. They weren't quite as large as the dogfish sharks. These are sort of like the fish's nose. Now remember that fish have gills that they use to breathe through, but they can still smell and detect chemicals through their nares in their nose. Sharks also have sensory organs that are special called ampullae of Lorenzini. If you look very closely on the snout area, you should see lots of teeny tiny little holes. These holes actually house organs that are sensitive to electrical fields. They can pick up the electricity that their prey gives off when it moves to help them find food. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up our shark and we'll take a look at its insides. Here are the insides of the shark. The first thing I'll go ahead and remove is the shark's heart. This shark has been injected with a dye, turning all of its blood vessels reddish pink so you can see them. Just below the heart, the biggest organ in its entire body is the liver. Now you saw the bony fish, the perch's liver, used to filter blood primarily. The liver of that fish was pretty small. The shark's liver is so large because it lacks a swim bladder. Instead, sharks have very large livers filled with a special oil they create. This oil helps them to remain buoyant or floating in the water. If you've ever poured oil on top of something like water, it floats on top. Here are some shark liver oil pills you can buy on eBay for $36. They're used in traditional medicine. The structures I'm going to remove next are the female gonads of the shark. Unlike many other fish, sharks, like this dogfish shark, have internal fertilization, and they actually give birth to live pups. If we open up these gonads, we'll actually see some of the shark eggs inside. There's one. There's another one. There's a couple more in there as well.
Baby shark do 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 do, baby shark do 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 do, baby shark do 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 do, baby shark.
Right, finally, we'll go ahead and remove the shark's digestive system. Here we see the shark's stomach leading down into its intestines. Let's go ahead and cut the stomach open and see what we find inside. The stomach is highly folded to increase surface area, and it looks like inside of the shark's stomach is a partially digested little fish. Oh, and a second one that's much more digested. After moving through the stomach, the food will move into the intestines, which remember are used for absorbing all of the nutrients that the shark's body needs from its food. Let's go ahead and cut that open and see what the food inside of the intestines looks like. Again, there's lots of folds to increase surface area for maximum absorption. And you see all the sort of grainy food inside of the intestine. It's already been digested by the stomach, so it is no longer recognizable.